What's up, YouTube? Coming back at you once again. Wanted to make a little quick video, talk about something I was listening to earlier today. Wind that window up for us. About accountability. So, before we jump in, you guys do me a favor, hit the like button, subscribe button. I really appreciate anything you can do to help out the channel. Comment if you've experienced this before. Let's get down in the chat and discuss some of these things here. What I wanted to talk about is something I heard. I forget the gentleman's name, but he was on, I think, on the Lapeef Network. He was talking to about the accountability, basically saying that not should, but men shouldn't date women with children. Women with children should date the men that they had the children with. And he didn't really go into details why, but as far as what brought him to that conclusion. But from what I understand, just based on the conversation, basically he was saying that would be a level of accountability, right? So why do we say that's a level of accountability? Because if women knew that they could only date the men that they had the children with, right? Then that would, of course, have them be a little bit more selective about who they lay with. Because what I believe, and I think it's standing consensus, that women control who they open their body to, right? Women are in control of that, and men control who they have relationships, right? So, in a form of nature that men are the ones who propose marriage, when men should be the ones who actually, control commitment, such and so forth, right? So with that said, if women control who has access to their bodies, then they should be able to control who they have children with. And the issue comes up, and they're like, well, this dude's a deadbeat, and they always try to use the exception to prove the rule. And what I mean by that, like, they'll say, oh, well, he's not there. I didn't know he was going to be a bad guy. But I think that the red flags are always there, because if you're being honest with yourself, you can look back at a lot of situations and see that this person just was not given I'm gonna be a good dad vibe, right? And there's a couple things that you can look at it and see. Like, one of them is, if they have children with other women, right, and they're not with those women, especially multiple women, in what world do you think you're going to be the woman that changes it, right? And then the other part of that is, you look at the behavior. Where if they don't have any stability in their lives, like they're running around doing the most, and they're living a straight life, in what world would that indicate that, hey, they're going to be a solid foundation for any children that I bring up? I think women just don't want to have the accountability to say that, hey, I'm out here messing with the wrong guys. And then they won't, after they've done that and they had children with these guys turn out to be exactly what they portrayed in the beginning of the relationship. Now they want another guy to come rescue that. And unfortunately, I would say that there's not a lot of award in playing another man's save game. I would only recommend men who have children date women with children. If you don't have any children, I wouldn't recommend it. I would not recommend going and finishing another man's save game. I just think there's not a lot of reward in that, because at the end of the day, the children are always going to identify with the biological father, and there's nothing you can do with that. And I've seen so many situations, even in my own family, where the guys have practically been there for 20 plus years. They've been the father, the grandfather, all these things, and then when something happens, then that particular step family throws the stepfather to the wolves. And I think, as a stepfather, what else can you do? You can't shun the children, right? So you have to give them and make them feel a priority in your life, even if you do have other children. And but at the end of the day, they're always going to choose their mother, right? And the mother, majority of the time, especially if she's had those children for a significant amount of time prior to you coming into the household, she's always it's going to be her and them, and then you You're always going to feel separate. Now, there may be a few cases out there, like I said, exceptions don't prove the rule, where it may be different because of certain circumstances. Maybe the father is non-existent for one reason or the other, and the father just doesn't have access. Um, but then you do run into the problem where the children are, especially if the children have an idea that the father's around, right? They know of a father. Then you have some rebellion, and I mean, you can't really discipline them children like you want to because they're not your children. And sometimes you're reminded of that, evidently so, right? I mean, I've dated women who've had children, and I thought that I was being a good person as far as what the children were, as the children were concerned. But at the end of the day, when even the slightest thing went left, it reverted back to it's them and then me. And I just wouldn't recommend that for anybody. So I place the onus on women because you control who you have children by. It's your body, your choice, as they like to say. And I'm not saying whether I'm pro or against. That's not this argument about, because I am pro-life. I believe every child deserves a chance, and I mean the onus shouldn't be on that child inconveniencing you or whatnot. I believe that every child should be given an opportunity. The problem is that a lot of people use that as contraceptives, or the child's inconvenience them, and when you pushed about that, they always bring up the exception to say why this should be a thing, and I'm like, the exception is less than 1%. But that's neither here nor that's not what this conversation is about. This conversation is about, if you do control access to your body, then you should be able to control access to what men you have children with. Therefore, you're accountable by the children you bring into the world, right? And I think nobody wants to accept that. And a lot of women will point and say, well, why aren't you looking at the guys and telling them to have discipline? Because if you tell them no, and here's my thing, right? Guys gonna get away with what they can get away with, right? And if you allow a guy to hop around, and this guy may be married, the guy has a girlfriend, this guy has multiple children, and you still like, yeah, I'm gonna deal with him, then you encourage the behavior. And I think women want to be coddled for the bad choices they make, because if the roles were reversed, and I've said this in many other videos, if the roles were reversed and a guy was out there having babies by trash women, right? Let's say I'm a guy and I have 3 kids, and all 3 of my kids' mothers were trash individuals. I'm gonna be held accountable to that. They're like, well, you keep sleeping with these girls that aren't good mothers. I'm gonna be held accountable for that. And majority of the time, especially if you're a man's man, you're going to take accountability for it and say, look, you know what? It's on me. I need to choose better. And men are a lot more selective, I would say, when it comes to who they want to rear a family with. Now, the problem that you're facing is that 20% of the guys are making 80% of these issues, right? Because I think the other 80% of guys are, they want to be in their children's lives. They want to be active. And then you have 20% of the guys, they have multiple families. They have multiple children outside of wedlock, and those are the guys that are considered deadbeats, or those are the guys that women are talking about, but 80% of the guys get the blame, when these guys had no indication, like I said earlier, that they would be good fathers. Nothing in their particular history says, hey, I'm gonna be a good dad. You should have you should have my second, third, fourth, and fifth baby. Like, think about that for a second. There's guys out there that have multiple baby mamas, not just one or two, but like a few, right? And women will still look at these guys and say, hey, I want to have a relationship with them. I want to be, my baby mama number 3, or baby mama number 4, whatever baby mama number you are. And they don't want to have any accountability on the poor choices that they make. There, like I said, there are exceptions to the rule. There are situations to where, you give it a guy and then, relationship sours. But I wouldn't say that that's the majority of the case. I mean, every woman's going to say, well, I didn't recognize his son. Yeah, you did. Yeah, you did. Because if you look at his behavior, he wasn't on no job working 9 to 5, putting in 40 plus hours a week. And he wasn't out there, with a degree and, well established. And, you went after the guy you thought was attractive. You saw qualities in him that, screamed bad boy. And you said, hey, that's who I want to make my child's father. That's how I want to give up my womb to. And maybe if I had given my womb to him, then I can keep them. And it's bewildering to me because nothing would say that. Like, it's not, for me, that would be the equivalent of me going out there and finding a woman that's a streetwalker, right? She's actually out there involved in, walking these streets, and that's her lifestyle. Or she's a very loose woman, and I say to myself, hey, I can change her. And that's the craziest thing. We have a phrase in, in men's community, you can't turn into a housewife. You can't do it. Right, so that's the level of accountability that men have to ourselves. Like, we're not going to take a woman who's active and say, okay, now I need you to be inactive over here. And the ones who try to do it, we clown them. But women don't do that. Women do not hold each other accountable. You're always looking for a reason that it could be someone else's fault except for hers. It's the guy's reason that it didn't work out. It's the guy's reason. So that would indicate to me that women believe that themselves and other women are flawless. And that in itself tells me everything I need to know, that women are allergic to accountability. Because men are going to tell each other about ourselves. Women don't. And, on that particular conversation, that woman, instead of saying, yeah, some of my sisters need to choose better, she immediately pivoted and said, you men need to control you men need to control other men. As if that could be possible. As if it could be possible for us to tell men not to sleep with women who are giving it up to them. That's what you're asking us to do. You're not essentially asking us to make sure that men are better fathers, because that's one thing. Majority of men who are good fathers don't hang out with men who are bad fathers. That's just the case. You're not going to see a guy who, is active in his children's life hanging out with a dude who just is a deadbeat. We don't do that. The only time that might even happen is if somebody's just your family member and you have to be around them. But other than that, like, if we're going to choose our friend group, you're not going to be a friend group of good fathers with deadbeats mingled up in there. You're just not going to do it. But however, women will have friends who make terrible decisions over and over again. And you continue to be in their friend group forever. Like, she's going to keep choosing bad guys. You're going to listen to her commiserate every time she's in another failed relationship. And you're not going to ever hold her accountable to what she's doing. You're going to continue to say, oh, well, girl, he wasn't this, he wasn't that. But you continue to continue to enable her to continue to do bad things. But that's just my thoughts, guys. Like I said, the more and more I look around, and more and more I talk to women, and just keep my eyes open, I see that women are allergic to accountability. I don't know if it can, or I know it should change, but I don't know if it can change, because it can't change unless women start to be a little bit more reserved in who they choose to open their womb to, and women start to just shut guys down that haven't made decisions that are conducive to raising a family, because you guys control access to it. But that's just my thoughts, guys. And like I said, if you agree, definitely let me know. If you disagree, you think I'm full of crap, go ahead and jump down in the comments, and we'll talk about it. Because I don't propose to know everything, but that's just my observation from being on this earth 41, almost 42 years. Anyway, guys, have a great one.